kind of this culture building has to be intentional. It is not something that's an afterthought. It doesn't just happen. It's not something that because you get together in the office every day and have a couple of t-shirts printed with a corporate logo on it. That is not culture. And so that leadership idea is really about setting the vision for the company. I'm a big Simon Sinek fan, so it's really defining the why. And if you can do that and again, set this vision, talk about this unmet need, how this directly impacts the patients that we are ultimately trying to serve, that is what defines the company as more of a mission-driven objective versus a mercenary.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I am Brett Fisher with the Fisher Search Group Leadership Podcast. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, Drew Williams, who is based down in San Diego, just down the coast from where I'm at here in North Los Angeles. And Drew, you have built multiple sales teams from scratch. You've led through some pretty tough startup situations, and you've learned firsthand the highs and the lows of leadership. You're articulate, decisive, and you have strong points of view on culture and what it really takes to succeed in medtech. So I am so glad you're joining us here today. Welcome to the program. I'm thrilled you're here. Welcome, Drew.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. Great to be here. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Awesome. So for our listeners, we're going to break this down into 4 different segments. We're going to talk about your career overview. We're going to get into leadership, followed by interviews and your stance on interviews. And then we'll wrap things up at the end with some pearls of wisdom. Before we continue, if you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, comment, and share so we can continue to bring more great content like this to you and our community of listeners out there. All right, let's just jump right in. Let's walk through the listeners through your career journey. You had some fascinating startup experiences, both wins and scars that have come from them. So question number 1 is you've been a part of 2 startup medical device environments. What did those experiences teach you about innovation and culture building?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. The startup space obviously has its own uniqueness to it. I started my career at J&J as a medical device rep, and then I was at NuVasive for many years and kind of moved up the ranks at that company. It was a fantastic experience. And I made a very decisive decision to go into the startup world because I wanted to continue to learn and have a different experience. And so I probably just really summarize it quickly in kind of 3 bullet points and say, lesson 1 is that every innovation has to be tied to an unmet need. It really does have to solve it's not just about solving a problem. It's about, is this the best or one of the best ways to solve the big problem that we are looking at? Because there's a lot of great ideas, there's a lot of great solutions, but that's not what actually drives a market. You have to actually be solving a problem that has something that's truly an unmet need. So that's kind of lesson.
So a gap. There's a gap in the marketplace, and no one's serving it.
Right. It could be an iteration off of a current offering that's out there today. My experience has really been in more of the white space where we actually are truly creating new markets, which I would argue has its own set of inherent challenges because there is no leader to follow. You really have to actually bring everything to the table, create the market, the go-to-market strategy. It is a much more difficult and challenging scenario. I would say there's more risk involved in that as well from a billing, coding, and reimbursement scenario because you don't know where you're going to land. So a little bit of a different challenge in that scenario. What's really interesting that's happening now, I'd say lesson number 2, is that there are a lot of really great executive leaders, meaning CEOs who are also founders or co-founders and board members that are incredibly smart people at these early stage, VC-backed companies. They are, again, incredibly smart people, but a lot of them have not been operators previously, meaning they're not a current CEO in a different company, or they weren't a previous CEO and then came onto the board either after an exit or whatever their scenario may be. And it is a fundamental piece where you need operators to help lean in and manage the business. It's not a day-to-day activity you're asking from the board or even from the CEO, quite frankly, but you need to have experience from those people who can actually see pitfalls 3, 6, 12 months down the road around your cash burn, right? Things that they don't want to see repeated because they made those mistakes in previous scenarios. And being an investor, you see a lot of things, but it's not the same as when you're in the seat making the decisions. So you can't just cookie cutter take something that worked in one market and pick it up and slap it down in another, because there's too many nuances, particularly in the medical device market.
Sure. 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 Sure.
So yes, so having strong operators really on the board, and then in particular as a CEO. There is a kind of sidebar there, which is the being a founder in a medical device company is an incredibly hard thing to do, and those people
Oh,
deserve,
wow.
oh yeah, all the accolade that they can get to take an idea, to find that unmet need, get it through regulatory seed money. I mean, it is an incredible endeavor, so they deserve a ton of credit for.
Commercialization, grabbing
It is
market share. Yeah.
it is an
Account acquisition.
unbelievable journey. I would say that there is a point, though, where if you are a founder, there is usually a crossroads that happen as to when is the right time for you to step away and not be the CEO of the company anymore. Because again, you have to get back to this operating scenario where, in a lot of cases, they may not be the right fit from the operational side. The third piece, which is
Yep.
really in line with that, is kind of this culture building has to be intentional. It is not something that's an afterthought. It doesn't just happen. It's not something that because you get together in the office every day and you have a couple of T-shirts printed with a corporate logo on it. That is not culture. And
Yep.
so that leadership idea is really about setting the vision for the company. I'm a big Simon Sinek fan, so it's really defining the
Yes.
why. And if you can do that, and again, set this vision, talk about this unmet need, how this directly impacts the patients that we are ultimately trying to serve, that is what defines the company as more of a mission driven objective versus a mercenary objective. And if you can
Hmm.
have a strong leader at the top of the organization who can do that, it really does drive the entire culture, because people who work at the company know why they're here every day. They know what their role is and how they're impacting patients ultimately at the end of the day. And that
Hmm.
brings this cohesiveness together that people can actually recite. It doesn't need to be some big, glamorous, long number of words. It should be really simple, actually. Like what you're doing every day should be able to be recited by the people that you work with, your colleagues, but it does not need to be complicated. But those are the three lessons I'd say, right? You got to find the unmet need, you got to have the right
Yep.
people in seats as operators, and then you have to have someone who's actually really explaining the why of the company in a clear and articulate way.
Yeah, more so than say a J&J MedTech company where it's already established, it's already going and it's a huge ecosystem. Coming back to that, when you made the jump and choice to go into the startup world, did you notice a lot of things that were different than everything that was already established? Like, were you rolling up your sleeves a lot? Were you taking on
Oh,
more than you ever thought you would do? I just want to paint that picture for a second because I think there is a little bit of disillusion with some candidates who want to go to the startups.
sure. I make this joke often, is that as I'm interviewing people, you kind of get a sense pretty quickly, and maybe we'll talk about the interview process here in a little bit. But it's one of those
Yep.
things where I assure you that there are a group of people who think that working at a startup is like being in a sitcom, and it is not.
Right.
Yes, you are rolling up your sleeves and you're wearing a lot of different hats. I think there's a little bit of a misnomer there where you're not wearing the hat of, as a VP of sales in a former role. I'm not doing marketing. But what I am doing is as I'm building the team, I'm doing a lot of the recruiting. I'm doing a lot of the onboarding. I'm doing all of the strategy, and I'm doing a lot of the training. I'm still
Yes.
in sales calls at some point in times. I was doing a
Yep.
lot of the revenue operations. I was doing a lot of the field operations. So you're wearing hats that are within the sales lane because there aren't other resources. And that's the biggest key component of this is at
Yep.
a large company, you have a lot of other resources at your fingertips. That's the part of the bureaucracy that slows things down at some point, but they're there and they're available to you. That is probably the biggest difference, is that you have to understand that you're going to be running on a minimal budget with minimal people around you. And you're going to look to your left and you're going to decide, well, who can get this done? The answer is you.
Hmm. Let's jump into leadership now. So you're passionate about the psychology of communications and helping people see leadership as more than just a rep being promoted, right? So you said when we brainstormed earlier, relationships only take you so far in your career. What did you mean by that?
So I think it's really important for sales reps to understand that there is a role that they play, and particularly the really good ones, that they should be building relationships in their market, whether that's with
Yes.
hospitals, executives, surgeons, whoever their call point is. If people want to move into a leadership role, whether that's the first as a territory manager or director level, that is a
Yep.
very different job than what you were doing every day as a frontline sales rep. And the skill sets that you need to be a good operator of what we just discussed around setting
Hmm.
strategy, working through budgets at a high level, working off of a P&L, that is a very different skill set than you just having a relationship with the local surgeon. And so there's this mindset that has to really shift around. I can no longer think about my myopic territory and what's going on with my 50 call points. I have to think about this very specifically as sales is one business unit within the larger company, right? And that's a really
Yep.
hard transition, I think, that a lot of sales reps don't first understand as part of this progression as you go through leadership. The commercial team as a whole is a multidisciplinary function. I'll say
Yep.
that again. So sales is a business unit, commercial teams are multidisciplinary functions. The classic example where this breaks down, Brett, is large companies where sales and marketing don't get along, don't talk, and they're not sharing information. And that is a really classic example of where the sales team needs certain resources and the marketing team is creating their own set of circumstances because they think they're gathering the right information. And now you've wasted a lot of time, likely a
Yep.
lot of money, and you're not providing the resources that the sales team need to face the challenges that they have, in their day-to-day jobs.
Right. So getting back to relationships, only taking you so far, it's being able to connect the pieces in the other parts of the organization that really help out? Or how can we
Yeah,
drive that
so
one home?
it's a great question. I think when you go to that scenario where your relationships as a frontline sales rep, it's great if you want to stay there for the rest of your career, and people should. There's no reason that people should feel they have to be promoted into management. If you want to go into management, there's very specific reasons and questions you should ask
That's right.
yourself, right?
Yep.
But if you there's somehow there is this, I think, negativity that some sales reps, I don't know what it's attributed to or attributed to, excuse me, is that they get to a place where they feel like they have to be promoted. You can be a really great sales rep, particularly if you take the skill and craft it and become a true professional. You can do it for 30 or 40 years and live a really great life. And that's where that relationship should actually be focused with your current customers. You need to be the mayor of that territory, right? You hear that kind of reference all the
Mm.
time.
Yep.
As you move
Market
up
master.
this, yeah, as you move up the scale in your company, it's more about your skill sets than just your relationships. If you're hiring a sales director or VP of sales because they know the CFO at some hospital, I would argue all day long that that is not the right person for that role.
That's a fair point. I like that. Communication, let's talk about that for a second. Huge in leadership. How do you adapt your style to the different personalities on your team?
Yeah, it's one of the things I always try and have a first conversation with people as they're looking at going into leadership is look at the team that you're on, right? And if you were going to lead this team, how would you actually want to communicate with your partners? Because it's very different when you're trying to actually provide, again, the why, the vision, the direction, answering challenging questions sometimes. It's very different than when you're on the team talking to one of your peers. And so I think the fact that we're just talking about the idea of how do I approach this is actually the first step. Being aware that you need to have a different approach to different people because they're all going to respond differently. And sometimes you have to do broad communication, right? You have team calls, there's just too much information to get out. That's fine, that's
Right.
normal. There's a way to do that that's succinct and direct. But really where that breaks down is if you're going to have these one-on-one calls and if they're going to be meaningful every week, that's the part where you actually need to tailor how you respond to if you've done it correctly, you've laid out goals, you've laid out tasks that are associated with them, people are taking accountability for it. And that's what you should be discussing on these weekly one-on-ones. And how you address a scenario of this doesn't seem to be working could be very different from people's different personalities. So I think just being conscious of it is the biggest first step that you have to take.
Okay, I like that. I think I jumped over a question, but it piggybacks off of what we were just talking about in terms of people could stay as a rep for 30 years, or maybe there's an expectation that they move into management sooner. What's the self-assessment process that someone should go to determine if they really should go into management?
Yeah, it's one of the first things that I always want to know about someone who comes to me and says, "Hey, I'm interested in moving into management," or a job becomes available. the
Right.
first question is, well, why do you want to go into leadership? Right? What is it about that particular role that is exciting to you that is drawing you to it? And I think that a lot of times in my experience is that the perception of what the sales rep believes the role is vastly different from what the day-to-day activity of that, in this case, a sales director would be. And so,
Interesting.
yeah, they need to have an understanding of, again, it comes back to this idea of communication, right? Would you want to lead this team, right? So in a lot of cases, the last two roles I had, I built the teams from scratch. So I got to
Mm-hmm.
choose who I hired, what their skill sets
Mm-hmm.
were, and what their personalities were. And so I intentionally brought people onto the team. And despite the fact they had different backgrounds, definitely different personalities, I chose them because I thought that they would be a great fit for the rest of the team. And so the biggest gap is usually that you have to figure out, one, why do I want to do this? And the second part is, if they answer those questions appropriately around, I want to learn about strategy. I want to learn about the finance of the business. I want to continue to scale my career. Those are the kind of the great ways to answer those questions.
Sure.
The second piece of that is really honing in on, okay, well, where are the gaps? Like, how can I actually help you get to a place where you're going to be prepared to interview for this particular role so that I can
Mm-hmm.
help you fill in these things over the next couple of months or whatever it is, whatever
To
period of time is
prepare
set aside.
to prepare to
Correct.
prepare to be a leader in that role.
Correct. Yes. And usually the best way to do that is actually to start kind of giving little like snippets of challenges, right? Okay, this is a problem that I'm faced with right now, Brett. How would you address this if this challenge came to you? And you can make it anonymous. You don't have to have them involved, obviously, in other people's, personal discussions that are going on with you or someone else's specific territory. You can somewhat make it
Mm-hmm.
anonymous, but you do need to give them very specific examples of this is a problem I'm faced with right now. How would you handle this? It gets the wheels spinning and having them to think about, oh, okay, this is a real world problem. I'm not just doing my job as a sales rep and then mirroring it so everybody else is going to do what I did because that's what worked, that's what made me successful. That is a huge fallacy that a lot of sales reps have, and you have to get through that as and
Yeah.
beyond that into there are different skill sets you're going to have to apply and things you don't know today that you're going to have to actively want to learn in order to do
Mm-hmm.
this job, because being a director and a manager and a leader is very different than your myopic, successful view in your territory.
Yeah, I want to ask you one more quick question that we didn't plan around hiring. Do you ever overhire and hire someone who was a manager who is fine going back to being an individual contributor? Obviously, if it makes sense, with the idea that maybe this person could help elevate your team or move up in your organization down the road.
Absolutely. I just did that at the
Okay.
last company that I was with. It's
Okay.
if that individual, again, they fully understand that they are in a individual contributor role. My biggest concern is actually are they going to be happy and satisfied being an individual contributor when they've already led a team? And
Right.
so that's usually the biggest concern I have. If they are okay with it, we've kind of gone through the interview process and we've been very clear about what the role is. There's no guarantees or promises that they're going to be promoted in some period of time. I am completely fine with it because you absolutely need to hire, where we used to refer to them as A players. And I would argue all
Mm-hmm.
day long that that person who is going to be on that team as an A player from a peer-to-peer perspective is going to take on some tougher challenges. They're going to help
Yes.
work through some of these problems, and they're going to keep the rest of the team in a not only in a collaborative place, but in a positive space, because every problem doesn't have an easy solution. And someone who's been a manager before can help actually articulate that message to the rest of the team. So when they're on calls with each other, it's productive. That's one of the
Yep.
biggest assets that person can actually help with.
So you've demystified a couple of hypotheses that some other candidates have had this year. So I thank you for that. Some people feel that if they've stepped into a manager role, they don't want to go backwards. But I think if there's a very strategic reason why they would do that, or a circumstance in their family situation or geography or less travel or who knows, it could be a really good thing to do. And then it's a bonus for you because you kind of get an overhire. And then maybe it's someone who you can even peg for management down the road if your current team is
Absolutely.
still a little bit green on the leadership side. So,
Yep.
thank you. Let's jump into our next section. Third section is going to be interviewing. I'm joined by my colleague, Drew Williams. This is episode 15, the Fisher Search Group podcast. And today we are talking about resilience, reality and the psychology of leadership. And now we're in section 3, interviewing. So you built teams from scratch. You said 2 teams, so more than once. Your hiring philosophy is pretty distinctive. One of the things that stood out to me was that you intentionally hire people from outside the therapeutic area that you're serving. Why do you think that's important?
Yeah, I think if you look at very broadly how most medical device companies function, and in a larger context, very large pharmaceutical companies or very large med device companies function, it's you're now kind of interviewing through the HR process, right? And you
Hmm.
have this kind of capped description of we prefer to have a rep that has this much experience in this particular market space. It's great
Yep.
to hire people who have, subject matter expertise in a particular market, and they know, again, going back to this relationship conversation, they know the right
Yep.
people. There is a solid reason to hire, again, if they fall in that category of being an A player, let's
Right.
bring them on board to our company and actually utilize all the resources they have at their disposal to help us accelerate our revenue. People will agree with that all day long. Where I try and actually have a little bit of I think, a different perspective on this is if you are truly hiring people because they are A players based off of their skill sets, the fallacy that a lot of companies fall into is they retread B players all the time just because they have subject matter expertise in a particular market. And
Mm.
if you're trying to build a true team of sales professionals, I would argue at a startup, you have to really recruit hard to bring people in because there's a lot of risk that's involved.
Yep.
There is a opportunity to bring in people who do not have the direct experience in your
Yep.
particular market, but have the right identified skill sets. 2 of the people I just hired at my last job, in my last role, did not have expertise in the sleep medicine space, and they were excellent reps. And so
Mm.
I don't think that you can hire an entire team from outside your clinical
Right.
area. That would be very difficult
Sure.
to do. But I do think that you need to bring people in who have a little bit of a different perspective. But also, because you're hiring them for their skill sets, the piece I will assure you of, Brett, there is not a medical device job that I can think of that is so complicated that I can't teach you what it is. Right? We are not building nuclear submarines.
Right.
Right?
Right. 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 Right.
So but there is this kind of almost hard set rule in certain divisions. Cardiology tends to be like this, oncology tends to be like this, right? And I'm not bagging on those industries in any way, but they tend to just look at people who've only had success in their particular market. And I think that you're missing out on some people that could actually have a strong contribution to your team just because you don't have urology experience.
Yeah. So does that also bring diverse thought?
100%. I mean, people are going
Okay.
to bring different experiences because they've
Yeah.
been in different roles at different companies. And
Yep.
the diversity of thought obviously is really what you want amongst your team, because sometimes you're going to come up against a problem that in your particular market, maybe no one's faced before, particularly if you're
Or
creating a white
therapeutic area. You've
space.
only looked at it one way.
Yep.
Yep.
And also the idea that, if you're in a white space, as I was mentioning before, the last 2 roles I've had, there is no other company to follow. There's no predicate device. I don't have a roadmap somebody else laid out. And so I have to actually figure out solutions to challenges that in a lot of ways, no one else has had to deal with before. And if there's a person who's I've been able to hire from outside of this particular market segment that faced something similar, then there's no reason to actually, there's no reason to exclude that person because they don't have sleep medicine space, for example.
All right, that's a really great point. So now why don't you take us inside the interview process? It's round 1, and I know you have an exercise. I've not heard this before. Take it away. What are you doing here?
So I have obviously worked with recruiters or someone on the talent acquisition team. They do a lot of screening for me. Even at a
Yep.
startup, you have to have that resource, that partner. It's even too much at a startup, doing too many different things. So once we've identified again skill sets, who the right profile of people are, and we've got a list of candidates, I like to have a 30-minute screening call, more of a networking call with the candidate prior to putting them into a formal interview. There's a couple of reasons I do
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
One is I want to be very conscious of people's time. And so
Yep.
if you're not a right fit out of the gate, I don't want to put you through, 2 interviews out of the gate. They're hour long each. It's obviously some of my time gets absorbed into that. But again, I want to be respectful of the candidate as well. So I use that first 30 minutes to really go over, I'll call it my kind of 5-minute soapbox speech about, this is the company, this is the unmet need, this is the goals, what we're trying to do, and just be very transparent
Hmm.
about, these are the challenges that we're faced with. Just try and be upfront about
Right.
that.
Yeah.
I can usually get to that in 5 to 7 minutes. Then I actually turn the call over to the candidate. And I want them to ask a series of questions. I'm very intentional about, I'm going to turn the call over to you. Please ask me whatever you would like to know about this particular role, the company. Um, Fire away, microphone is yours, so to speak.
Hmm.
The reason I do that is because I want to know, one, how prepared is the candidate, right? There are people who still show up for interviews who went on your website for 5 minutes and then hopped on a call, right? And so I want to
Yep.
know that prior to getting into a formal interview process. Did you actually respect the time of the company and my time by preparing?
Is it basically just to fire away, ask me questions, or do you say, I want you to now lead the call and you can see how they organize the time left? It's 20 to 25 minutes left, right? It's their floor. So what markers are you looking for? I know you said they've done the research, they've learned about the company, the types of questions they ask. What else are you looking for in that 20 to 25 minutes? Are you asking them
Yes.
to lead the call like deliberately, or is it what questions do you have for me?
It's a deliberate intention of, hey, I'd like you to lead the call now. Please let me know, what questions specifically do you have about this particular job or myself, whatever the case may be. But I'm going to let you take the call from here. And then
Okay,
when the
got it.
questions stop, that's where the call ends, right? So that's essentially kind of part of it. So I obviously try and cap it, somewhere around 30-ish minutes. We're not on the phone for
Yep.
2 hours, but it does give me a real clear idea. Again, one of, are they prepared? Have they actually worked at a startup before? But the other really big piece of this, Brett, which I think is critically important, is it tells me a lot about, are they curious? Are they inquisitive? Because they've come to this particular conversation wanting to know specific pieces of information about the job. And so it's not like, who's the rep currently in the territory now? How are they performing? Those are fine questions to ask in an interview. I think that they're relevant at a certain point. But if we're having this networking and screening call, I really want to know, are you a problem solver? Are you somebody that actually is coming to this particular opportunity because you want to build something? You've been in a large company most of the times in previous people's experiences, and they're intentionally moving to a different experience because they want to help build something. That, in particular, to me, in the roles I've had in the last two positions I've been in, there's going to be some messiness when you're at a startup. Not everything's going to be clear. Things are going to go sideways all the time. You need to have a group of people who have come to this opportunity because they want to solve those problems. They want their fingerprints to be in the ultimate foundation of what this company looks like. And I can tell by what questions people ask if they're in that scenario, or if they're just
Hmm.
more comfortable in the larger dynamic of, the the endless amount of resources we talked about before in some of these large companies.
Yeah. Interesting. We coach, opening, building rapport, quick overview, star questions, then what questions do you have for the candidate, and then close. Very like, common template. What you're telling us is slightly different. You're going to give your opening pitch. This is what we're about, mission, core values, all that stuff, the why. But then I'm going to turn it over to you. It's almost like they're pre-qualified. They could probably do the job, but you're trying to find out if they truly are able to solve your problems through the questions, how curious they're getting in asking you about the opportunity. It's almost cutting to that fourth section, making that evaluation, and then deciding if there should be a second interview.
Yeah, because the way I usually close the calls is, look, there's a formal interview process. This is what it looks like, right? I lay that out very clearly for the candidates at the end of the call as I'm closing. What
I
I
like
asked
it.
them to do is, we had a good conversation today. I'd like you to think about all the things that we discussed, the risk that's involved, the opportunity that we have, and certainly if this is the right fit for you, because this is a two-way street, and this needs to be the right chapter that you're writing, for your career. And so we had a good discussion today. Think about whether or not this is the way you want your career to go. And then we get into, if they say yes, we get back together. Your format, certainly the star format, that all comes out during the formal interview
Later.
process. But
Yep.
I actually, and I'm weeding these people out. I don't want that to sound negative, but there are a significant portion of people after I do that initial 30-minute screening call that don't move forward. And I would rather have that at the beginning than have
Oh
that
yeah,
person interviewed
100%.
Yeah, right. So it's I know it seems obvious, but it's one of those things where I've learned over time that I only have so much bandwidth. When you're trying to literally build a team from scratch, you're going to be doing a bunch of interviews. You better put those people in the seats who are the ones that are really interested, and you know specifically why they're interested.
I love it. Let's jump into our fourth section, which is Drew Williams' Pearl of Williams. So, as we wrap up, some questions that came up, which I'm sure our audience will appreciate. Aspiring medical device sales. We have kind of three questions. Capped commissions are really, yeah, three questions. So, capped commissions, navigating forces outside of your control, such as things that may happen at a startup. And then, if someone today listening wants to be a leader tomorrow, what's the first thing they need to do differently? So, real quick, cap commissions. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I feel pretty strongly about it. I think, particularly in the startup world, there's a lot of risk that's there. I mean, most startup companies don't make it. And it goes back to the comment we talked about before. If you're truly trying to recruit A players, sales professionals, and they want to move and take a risk from where they currently are to come to your particular device that solves your particular unmet need, there has to be a reason that they're coming. And if you're going to have these performers actually do their jobs and execute, it is very likely that their quotas are going to go up rapidly, not just year over year, but even quarter over quarter.
Oh,
Right? There is an
wow.
expectation of rapid growth when you get Series C money and you're commercializing, there is this expectation that the rocket ship is taking off. That's why you're hiring all these people. You need to hire them before the revenue comes in, and this is always the risk around cash burn of a startup. But you need
Hmm.
to have people in those seats who you think are going to be able to execute the strategy and build this company literally quarter over quarter. And if you're going to cap someone's income for the rewards that they have, you can clearly see what kind of effort you're going to get out of those reps. If at a point you
Mm,
tell them the effort that you're doing doesn't result in any more income for you or any more reward for you, it's pretty simple, human nature that if I do more work and I get less rewards, I'm not going to do the more work.
right,
Right?
right.
Pretty straightforward. So the last piece I'll make on that comment, Brett, is that again, you're trying to recruit people into a risky scenario, and you're
That's
building a
true.
company. You're not building a cult. People don't have to stay, right? And so if you're going to put people in a position where they're going to be rewarded, they need to have that very simple understanding that all of my effort that I'm doing and the expectations you have of me, which are increasing, I'm being rewarded as well.
Okay. Next question. So, advice for people climbing the ladder into leadership about resilience and navigating forces outside of their control. I know you mentioned there was an instance where you can do everything right. You can do, but still, I mean, we have it with us as well. I mean, we have candidates who we set up, sounds good, looks good, and then in the last interview, they'll go like that, completely out of our control, and we have to go back and sometimes start all over. So.
Start all over again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So outside of your control.
Yeah, those pieces. Look, the medical device industry is tough, whether you're at scale or you're a startup or somewhere in between. There is a lot of headwinds that you have no control over, particularly from like a regulation standpoint,
That's
from
true.
the amount of prior authorizations that are being dumped into offices today, right? For everything from prescriptions to procedures to surgeries. It is, in my opinion, an intentional roadblock that these offices have to deal with. So you could have two completely disparate businesses, one in urology and one prescription, one surgical, right? They have nothing to do with each other. But the person in the office has to deal with both because they're dealing with all the prior authorizations. So there's all these headwinds that you have. They're constantly in your way. And even if you have the right people, you have the right strategy, you've actually got the right solution, you've got the right people at the top explaining the why and doing all the right things, it can take years in some circumstances to get through the coding part of it, to get through the pricing part of it. It is a very difficult thing to get a medical device company to scale. So it's just
Mhm.
something you need to be aware of in particular as you're moving into these startup worlds. There's a lot that's going to be thrown at you, and again, do everything right, and stuff can still go out of your control.
And just like in sales, you have to keep your head up and you got to keep going. You got to keep a lot of leads in that top of funnel. So if that startup doesn't work out, you have your network, you have people you can lean on to try to move on to the next thing as quickly as possible. Um,
Correct.
Last question, someone looking to get into leadership, what's the one thing they should change today to get into leadership tomorrow?
Start leading now. You
Yeah,
don't need to have a leadership position to lead.
I love
And it
that.
goes
Get
back to
creative.
yeah, one of the questions you asked me earlier was about, would you hire someone who was a manager before and is now an individual contributor? Yes, because that person can help lead. They don't need the title to actually help solve problems. I think that
Mhm.
there's again, a misnomer around, well, that's not my job or my role. Well, particularly if you're interested in going into leadership, raise your hand and start letting your team around you know, and certainly your direct manager know that, look, I want to take on some additional challenges, or how can I help? However you
Mhm.
want to phrase that. But don't wait until you have the title to start showing interest and then learn. I mean, that is the biggest part of your journey that you need to start today. And then again, identify where those gaps are, with your direct manager, and then go find the tools and resources to help improve your current situation.
Yeah, speak up. One of the last guests, a couple guests ago, I had is like you can't wait around hoping you're going to get noticed. You need to put
Right.
yourself in positions that will then get you like, oh, okay, you're raising your hand, you're taking something on, you're going above and beyond. That takes, that takes a lot, and I think for some people they're a little bit more. Well, I guess in sales you're already pretty, you know, we're talking about A players here who go seek it out, but still, there's still some people who need that extra push and encouragement to raise their hand and go step into situations that they wouldn't normally do.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that. And just your professional development is your responsibility.
Yep,
Right?
that's
Yes,
true.
you can raise your hand and get information and certainly feedback, and you absolutely should, from the people that are partners, around you, even in other business units, right? Finance, marketing. Go talk to people in different areas of the company so that you can actually build relationships, but also get feedback from those people about how you can be a better leader, particularly if you're kind of grooming into those roles. But your professional development is just that. It's your responsibility to actually raise your hand and figure out where the gaps are. Because I can tell you that, look, I can help you get better at making, the difference between a budget and P&L and planning, and all those great things, and give you some examples. But you're going to have to do some learning and educating on your own, right? And I can't force you to do that.
And the great thing is we're creating content right now today for people to develop themselves while they're listening in the car, while they're out on their second screen. But there is so much content out there. There's so many people out there who are willing to give you the information, help show what they did along the way, such as Drew, to help you get there. And so it couldn't be any more easier now to be able to listen on what you can do to learn to develop professionally. So on that note, I can't thank you enough for joining me, for taking the time, for sharing all of this. I know it's going to benefit a large group of people in our candidate community who are looking to get into leadership, considering startups, considering doing something outside of their therapeutic area. The candidate who doesn't want to go back to an individual contributor because they were a manager. All of this is super helpful. Any last thoughts before we sign off today?
And I appreciate the conversation. It was great. I'd say, if you have individuals who want to have a further conversation, look, just we can obviously work together. I'm happy to help out however I can. This should not be a journey that people are doing alone. There's too much
Mm-hmm.
knowledge out there. So whether it's through a
Yep.
podcast or other platforms that you're creating for them, or if I can help in any way, I'm happy to do so, and really appreciate the time.
Yep, we'll tag you for sure when we post this. So we encourage people to reach out to you directly on LinkedIn, type a message, reach out, and network. That's why we're here. So thanks, Drew. Have a great day, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Brett.
All right, thanks.